Remember how Obito survived Amaterasu, which Itachi sealed in Sasuke's eye? The technique itself by which he endured the attack was not shown to us. It was left off-screen. However, it is quite obvious that it was Kamui, or Izanagi. Or Kamui, or Izanagi. At first glance, the question seems rather simple. However, finding the answer is much harder than it may seem. Believe me, this is actually a rabbit hole that is too deep. I was surprised to discover that on the internet, for more than 12 years now, debates on this topic have still been going on. So let's try to figure out this situation together. First, let us recall that scene. Obito introduced himself to Sasuke and partially removed his mask. Before that, Itachi had placed the Amaterasu technique into his brother's eye, which was supposed to react to Tobi's Sharingan. The technique activated, Obito recoiled in fear. Then he was engulfed in flames first, his shoulder, and then his entire body. The Uchiha fell into darkness, screamed for some time, and then went silent. He was gone. A voice was heard from the darkness, and Obito returned, picking up his mask. So what exactly happened there? Let's consider each option separately. I will present arguments for and against each ability, and leave the conclusions for the end. Let us start with Kamui. In the third data book, there is a fragment about Tobi's ability to become intangible. In the context of intangibility, it is revealed that he managed to survive Amaterasu. It would seem that the case is closed. Obito used Kamui. After all, that is what is written in the data book. However, for many people, this is not an argument, because the third data book is not 100% up to date. It has already been subjected to retcons. The information in it may be outdated, or it may not be. You understand that yourselves. So this is kind of an argument, but not a super ironclad one. Someone might ask, why didn't Obito become intangible immediately? Let us not exclude the element of surprise. Tobi was not prepared for the attack. In front of him was a weakened Sasuke, who posed no threat, and at first there simply was no need for Kamui, so Obito did not react immediately. Another question. Is it possible to transfer Amaterasu into the Kamui dimension by becoming intangible? If you think about it, Obito transfers his clothes together with himself. If the fire touched the clothes, then it could very well enter the Kamui dimension. However, in that case, intangibility would not save the Uchiha Obito, would simply continue burning in his own dimension. And the same applies to a full escape into the Kamui world. Then let us consider the option in which the fire is not transferred together with Obito. After all, only Shin's parasites could damage him even after transfer, because they crawled under the skin and became part of his body. Let us assume that other attacks are not transferred together with the body. Just assume it. Okay, I still remember Conan's paper tags, no need to remind me about them. So, in that case, intangibility could save Obito. Once in the Kamui dimension, he would hide from the deadly technique. But there is one nuance. Where would the fire go? The answer is obvious. It would fall onto the floor of the hideout, and it would catch fire. In that case, while Obito is chatting with Sasuke, everything around would be engulfed in black flames. As we know, this did not happen. So I would discard the version with intangibility, because it does not work in any scenario. But I would not discard Kamui itself. You see, Obito can transfer objects near him into his dimension, sort of sucking them in. If you remember, he did this with Fu and Tarun, and with many others in general. In principle, nothing prevented him from sucking Amaterasu into the Kamui dimension in the same way. True, in that case, the dimension would most likely burn. And later in the story, we saw a fairly even landscape. Although this proves absolutely nothing, we essentially know very little about the Kamui dimension, about how large it is. In general, I will not develop the idea that the Kamui dimension would burn down completely from Amaterasu entering it, due to the lack of evidence that this is possible. Thus, Obito had 3 ways of using Kamui. First, become intangible, but then, the fire would fall onto the floor of the cave and burn it down. Or, it would be transferred together with Obito. In both cases, intangibility is meaningless. Second, completely escape into the Kamui dimension and wait it out there. However, in that case, the fire would be transferred with him, or, again, would set the cave on fire. Third, transfer only the fire, and leave it burning in the Kamui dimension. This explains why the cave did not catch fire, and where the flames disappeared to in general. Let us not forget about the secret that Tobi mentioned. He said that if Itachi had known his secret, he would be dead. Remember this moment? I will return to it later. If we are talking about Kamui, what secret could he have meant? The databook states that the Uchiha did not reveal the secret of his true power even to other members of Akatsuki. Could this be intangibility? I doubt it. Firstly, Obito demonstrated intangibility in front of Leaf Ninja and his enemies. What is there to say about allies? Then teleportation? Again, Toby teleported in front of his enemies. We can also discard the 5-minute limit of intangibility and the need to be tangible to use the Kamui dimension, because at the very least, Conan knew about this. And this already contradicts the words of the databook, where it is said that no one knew the secret of Obito's jutsu. I will put forward my own assumption. If we are talking about Kamui, the secret of the technique may be the parallel dimension itself. That is, simply its existence. No one knew that Obito was not just moving through ordinary space from point A to point B, but was going into a completely different world and could drag objects there. Knowing the weaknesses of Kamui, Conan was able to inflict serious damage on Obito, but she did not come close to uncovering the main secret. Kakashi was the first to do this during the war, when he assumed that the dimension of his eye was connected to the dimension of Toby's eyes. It was then that Obito's entire strategy with intangibility finally fell apart. So, my version regarding Kamui is as follows. Obito's secret lies in his dimension. Itachi did not know that the man in the mask was capable of transferring fire to a place connected to his eyes. Itachi may have known that the surviving Uchiha could become intangible and avoid danger by moving to another place thanks to space-time ninjutsu. However, he also understood that this would not save Fake Madara from a surprise Amaterasu attack, and therefore, he expected the black fire to finish him off. But Itachi did not know that Obito was capable of sending Amaterasu separately from himself into another dimension known only to Toby. This secret ceased to be a secret only after Kakashi's discovery. Now let us talk about Izanagi, a technique capable of turning death itself into an illusion. Obito possessed this genjutsu. What prevented him from using Izanagi to protect himself from Amaterasu? Essentially nothing. We remember how the Uchiha screamed in pain and then fell silent for some time. Was this the moment when he was rewriting reality? The main argument of supporters of the Izanagi version is Toby's clothing. The flames engulfed most of his body, and the clothes should have at least been damaged. We know that after Izanagi, clothing is restored to the state it was in at the moment of the technique's activation. In the fight with Conan, Obito's clothes were not restored because he received damage before activating Izanagi. So our hero just took a blast of flames point blank, but his clothes remained intact, exactly like with Izanagi. It would seem like an ironclad argument, but not everything is so unambiguous. Apparently, Amaterasu works on clothing in a rather strange way. The fire burned through Kurin's cloak, but at the same time did not affect Kaguya's clothing. Supporters of the Izanagi version believe that Amaterasu needs only a moment to burn clothing, because it is incredibly powerful flame. Well, the fire stayed on Kaguya for several seconds, quite a short time, but her dress should have been damaged at least somehow. So I would not prey to the idea that Amaterasu necessarily destroys all clothing instantly. But let me say something in defense of Izanagi. Many people write that the man in the mask simply would not have had time to activate this genjutsu, that he had no time for it. As we remember, activation of Izanagi requires time and hand seals. In response to this, I suggest rewatching the fight with Conan, where Fake Madara uses Izanagi without one arm, without seals, and instantly. Did he have the opportunity to use this jutsu in the case with Sasuke? Yes, at that very moment when he noticed the Sharingan and was surprised. In that instant, before the release of the flames, he had every chance to save himself. However, in truth, I find it hard to believe in the Izanagi idea, and here is why. The thing is that the full-fledged introduction of the technique took place in Chapter 476 in 2010, while Obito survived Amaterasu in Chapter 397 in 2008. What was the point of introducing a technique that is neither mentioned nor explained for almost 2 years? How were readers at that time supposed to explain this moment to themselves without knowing about Izanagi? Kishimoto seems to have problems with long-term planning of techniques. I simply cannot believe that the author thought through this ability so far in advance and showed Izanagi almost 100 chapters before explaining how it works and even announcing its name. In any case, when Obito realized that Danzo was using Izanagi, he could have thought, so this is exactly how I avoided death from Amaterasu. The mangaka should have built a bridge to those events, explained that we had already seen Izanagi in action, we just did not know that it was it. Usually in Naruto, this is exactly how things are handled. If something has already been shown and later gains new context, Kishimoto returns to it to remind his readers. But here, nothing like that happens. Let us return to Obito's secret technique. I hope you have not forgotten it yet. So, could Izanagi have been that secret? On the one hand, before the fight with Conan, Toby did not show this technique to anyone. On the other hand, by that logic, Itachi should not have known that fake Madara was capable of using Izanagi. However, this is hard to believe. Look, let us start with the fact that Itachi, in principle, knew about the existence of Izanagi, that such a technique exists. He also believed Obito to be Madara, the legendary ninja and the strongest Uchiha of the past. Would such an intelligent character as Itachi, who tried to foresee everything, really not have guessed that Madara, with his experience and power, might know Izanagi? If we take into account that Itachi could have suspected Toby's Izanagi, then the situation becomes even more absurd. After all, during the war, Itachi said that the perfect weapon against Izanagi is Izanami, and that Amaterasu is useless in such a case. Would he really have sealed Amaterasu in Sasuke's eyes then? Yes, the element of surprise was on his side, but there was no insurance in case Obito came to Sasuke with intangibility already activated. Itachi could have counted on Obito not having time to use Izanagi, but again, a person with Madara's level of power would hardly fall victim to such a trick. And do you know what Obito's secret really could have been if we are talking about Izanagi? Hashirama's cells. It was precisely thanks to them that the Uchiha was able to use this technique for a very long time. After all, it is known that pure-blooded Uchiha can use Izanagi only for a few seconds, and therefore, Itachi could have hoped that after resurrection, Obito would still fall within the damage radius of Amaterasu. However, with the first cells, the false Madara was quite capable of burning for a sufficiently long time before finally resurrecting. Do not say that Itachi's Sharingan could have seen Hashirama's DNA. Obito himself only learned about the cells in Danzo's body after Shimura created trees. Before that, the man in the mask suspected nothing, and yet he had a Mangekyo Sharingan. And once again, it seems that the case is solved. Itachi did not know that Toby had Hashirama's cells, and that he could maintain Izanagi long enough to survive Amaterasu. However, there is another argument that nullifies all these options. Izanagi cancels a person's death, but does not remove the cause of that death. I will explain this clearly. When Sasuke's arrow pierced Danzo, he resurrected nearby, but the arrow itself did not disappear. I think you understand what I am getting at. Obito could have used Izanagi and resurrected in the same place where he died, but then where did Amaterasu go? Again, we remember that the cave did not burn down. Yes, Obito could have transferred the fire into another dimension using Kamui already after his resurrection. But then, what was the point of wasting a spare Sharingan only to then use Kamui if he could have immediately teleported the fire directly off his body? That is illogical. On the other hand, the principles of how Amaterasu works are rather contradictory. The fire will burn until the target turns to ash. Itachi programmed the technique onto Obito, and he died, after which he resurrected thanks to Izanagi. Amaterasu, as it were, considered that the target had burned to ashes, and therefore the fire went out. However, in Sasuke's fight against Itachi, the flames spread to other objects, such as trees. So there are no guarantees that after Obito's fake death, Amaterasu would not have touched the floor and walls of the cave. Well then, we have dealt with Izanagi. This version has its strengths and weaknesses. Do we have other options for how Obito could have survived Amaterasu? In fact, yes. We remember that his secret could have been Hashirama's DNA. The blow of the flames hit the side of his body that consisted of Zetsu cells. There is an opinion that Obito cut off that side and then regenerated, or that he simply grew a tree, shed the fire, and returned to his original state. I find this hard to believe, at the very least because just a moment later the fire engulfed the entire body of the man in the mask. Emergency separation with the help of Zetsu implants clearly would not have helped here. The affected area was too large. And again, releasing a tree and cutting off the burning part does not explain the absence of Amaterasu later, unless we take Kamui into account. There is also the claim that instead of Obito, a double Zetsu initially appeared before Sasuke. This is mistaken for many reasons. Firstly, Toby did not expect any threat and saw no reason to send a double out of caution. Secondly, Sasuke's Sharingan was programmed specifically for Obito's eyes. A fake Sharingan would hardly have worked. Thirdly, after fake Madara's return, he picks up the fallen mask, which did not break apart into Zetsu cells. That is, it really was the real mask of the real Toby, and not a copy. Alright, all of this is nonsense. Because in reality, Obito used the strongest ability in Naruto, the substitution technique. It is just broken and has no counter. A log burned instead of him, and the real Toby remained safe and sound. Okay, jokes aside, that's enough. Let us move on to the conclusions. Kishimoto wanted to build up pathos and show that the man in the mask is such a powerful character that even Amaterasu cannot take him down. In principle, the author succeeded, but he forgot to explain what exactly happened there, in the darkness. We do not know for sure how Obito survived this attack. All that remains for us is to speculate. It could have been Kamui, in the case that Obito transferred the fire from his body into another dimension. Or it could have been Izanagi, either the flames considered him dead and went out, or Toby teleported the fire into another dimension using Kamui afterward. Again, it is very confusing that this technique had not yet been introduced into the story at that point. And later, for some reason, the scene in the cave was never explained. So personally, I still believe a little more in the version involving space-time ninjutsu. What do you think it was? What do you agree with, and what do you disagree with? If I made a mistake somewhere, or did not take something into account, be sure to correct me. And if you liked the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.